experience of me. And of course, it's based on their sort of conditioning of what male and female is. But I really kind of resonated with that fluidity. And that's kind of, I've resonated with that my whole life around my gender. So all are welcome.
I kind of adore that, what you just said. It feels so invitational into this really very unfolding, when you use the word fluid, it feels so flexible, and you can like the openness of it feels like, well, depending, no matter what people say, you're good to go.
Yeah, exactly. And it took me a long time to, I mean, it's like a little bit about what we'll be talking about today, but it's, the binaries that we get boxed into, and, where's that flexibility that really is kind of the more honest truth of our lives. Like really most of us don't fit in most of those boxes we've been given. And so much of this somatic work is building capacity to allow fluidity, which just means to be able to move toward, what you want to move toward.
Okay, I love it. I'm on your train. So
our train. It's our train.
I'm on our train. So why don't we introduce Sage now? I think we're time now, right, Mickey? It's time to start?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So hi, everybody. We're here with Sage Hayes. I'm very excited to have Sage with us, and I'm going to read her bio really quick now. Sage is a somatic practitioner exploring frontiers of embodied liberation. She's currently opening the School for Embodied Liberation and is a lead teaching assistant with the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute. His work integrates bodydynamic craniosacral therapy, systemic constellations, ecstatic dance, and somatic experiencing, the work of Byron Katie, and intuitive wisdom practices. Sage is passionate about creative ways to interrupt and heal from the trauma of supremacy, binary thinking, and marginalization in systems and in bodies. Wow. Welcome, Sage.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm still sort of getting used to, do I want it to be gallery view or speaker view? Because it's like so fun to see so many of your faces. So I'm sort of still kind of taking that in, but thank you for your welcome. I didn't hear a word you said, but it felt really nice. And I thought it was really fun that you experimented with she and he.
I wanted to know how it would feel for me. And then since you were so fluid with it, I thought, well, why not try it for me? That's so cool.
How did it feel?
Good. I think because I know how you feel as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. It's, hello everyone. This is so weird and awesome to be speaking to so many people at once. Some of who I can see and some of who I can't. I just want to say, like, I'm really thrilled to see you all or feel you all. And I'm really happy to be with you today. And my prayer and my hope is that our hour together will be helpful to you. It'll be of service to you and your life and your choices. And that is just my deep prayer and my deep intention. So like, hello from all over the world. Hello, I've been looking at the chat already, like just a little bit, even though I'm kind of overwhelmed by it. And it's been really sweet to have some people just show up and say, hey, I'm a trans person. I'm here. It's so nice to see representation. Sort of makes me want to cry, actually. To see the POC, non-binary trans, like, it's just so awesome to be in healing community together and to create an event like this that's really committed to representation, not perfection, but we're working toward like getting more voices into the mix. And I'm just so honored to be able to hopefully share something that's helpful and to bring my identities into the mix. And maybe I'll just start with that a little bit and talk a little bit about, just a little bit more about who I am, as far as I know. So I am calling in from Providence, Rhode Island in the United States, also, but primarily it's Narragansett and Wampanoag territories of the Native people here in the United States. I am a somatic practitioner, which basically means I do my own work and I support people in communities to increase capacity to be able to have choice in your life, more choices that are more congruent with who you are, not that are necessarily trying to fit into who people think you are. So just really interested in how do we live in these bodies, these identities, with agency and with choice. So I do that in a variety of different ways. I am a somatic experiencing practitioner. I am a cranial sacral practitioner. I'm a practitioner of constellations. You don't need to know what any of these are. And I am a queer, anti-racist white person. I am a trans person, go by he, she, they, whatever your experience is of me. And I'm a community DJ. I believe in movement and practice together. And yeah, I guess that's, and I feel like I have a deep commitment to inhabiting my body, which is a mixed bag most days. I just want to say, like, I'm not calling in from an expert place. I'm calling in from a practice place, from a real human struggle with, you know, oppression place and privilege place, of trying to figure it out with everyone else about how we do things a little bit differently. So that's a little bit about who I am. I'll pause there. I don't totally know how you want this to run, so I'll pause and see
Sure.
how that all feels.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about you. And I absolutely think it's beautiful that you come from this practice place and acknowledging that we're really all working to figure things out together. So I think that's beautiful that, you know, you acknowledge that, because we're all doing that. So I know that you have a practice that you want to lead us with, and you'd mentioned maybe doing it up front. I know we're going to be talking about this embodied paradox that you were referring to. So I'm not sure, would you like to first lead us into the practice and then we could get into some discussion? Or do you want to start with talking about that? Yeah,
no,
go ahead.
I think it would be good to do a practice, just because I think it kind of can set the tone potentially. So it's completely bizarre to lead a practice with 150 people or however more who are going to be watching this, because I just want to say, like, my hope is that, like, we can be present with each other while we're being present with ourselves, and that this is yeah, it's almost paradoxical to lead a practice, because it's just sort of whatever. I'm just working with, like, the virtual reality schema of things, and
Yeah.
my own edges around that. Okay. So the practice that I wanted to invite folks into today is actually about ancestors and descendants. And it's about embodied freedom and choice, and hopefully maybe moving beyond our mind's paradigm of what's possible. And every practice I ever offer is kind of I feel like it's always kind of coming through me, and it's an invitation. So you don't have to do it. You can just listen, and you might think it's totally bizarre, and that's fine, and you don't have to do it. But if you'd like to, I'd like to offer it to you today as an invitation to tap into the wisdom of the people who've come before us, your people who've come before you, and then the people who are going to come after us, right? I'm really interested in inviting us to expand our consciousness sort of beyond the now into the wisdom of past and present, to be able to inform the now. So if that resonates with you, right on. And if not, just, like, I don't know, go get a sip of water or something. Okay, great. So go ahead if you want. Again, everything's an invitation. There's no right way to do this. Take what you want, leave the rest. You kind of just sort of sink into your body if that feels available to you, right? Just kind of drop your seat, or if you're standing, feel your feet on the floor. And maybe take a look around where you are to just kind of, like, place yourself in time and space. Maybe you like where you are right now, maybe you don't. And just maybe pick one thing out in the room that in the room or the nature that you're in that creates a little bit of a point of pleasure, actually. So just pick something out, take a look around, and as you look at that thing or you smell that thing, just notice what happens as you just give it a little bit of focus in the now. Notice what happens in your body. I notice I'm feeling a little bit more, landing a little bit. Take a couple of breaths with it. And just see if your body can settle in a little bit more into the present moment, whatever that means for you, whatever that means for you. Just take a moment, one or two more moments. Again, just feeling your body now. Does it feel a little bit different than when we started? Maybe, maybe not. Just noticing, right? This is all embodied work is mostly a practice of noticing. It's not so much trying to change anything. It's trying to create conditions that help ourselves come into awareness of right where we are and allowing that, right? Even if we're like severely anxious or if we're really depressed, that all gets to be here. That's like really reasonable right now on the planet, that you may be feeling any of that or some other extreme state that feels very difficult. So that's all super welcome here, right? No need to, obviously we want to change those because they're not comfortable, but sometimes it is just what it is. Great. So from wherever you are, I'm going to just, whatever state you're in, I'm just going to invite you to visualize or travel back in time a little bit. And it could be 50 years, or it could be 100 years, or it could be 500 years, or 5,000 years, or even beyond that. And just let your mind kind of wander back to find an ancestor, someone who you know or have never met before. Could be a human, it could be a mammal, it could be a reptile. Like, this is really open to find an ancestor whose choices in life made it possible for you to be here. Right? And this is like imaginal, so there's no right answer. It could be a grandparent, a great-great-great-grandparent, but just feeling, just saying hello to them. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to know who they are. It could just be a feeling, but some being, but because of the choices they made, you get to be here today. Okay? And just notice what you feel in your body. If you can't find anybody, that's okay. It's just an idea right now, and you can just hold that. And just notice, like, see if there's a piece of wisdom they have for you. Or just notice what they did so that you could be here. Or just notice the feeling of that choice and how that lives in your body today. And if I was there with you, each of you, or if we were with each other, I'd say, tell me about what you notice and what you feel. So maybe at some point today, you'll have an opportunity to share with somebody about that. Or you can share it in the chat, or, you know, you can just put it out, say, oh, this is what I feel. If you'd like to, you can, if you haven't already, you can thank that entity for making that choice so that you could be here. Okay, when you're ready, we're going to travel back up into the present, taking a breath in the present moment. Carrying that energy with us that we just touched. And now what we're going to do is we're going to journey into the future. And this could be 5 years, 50 years, 500 years, 5,000 years, 5 million years. And we're going to just travel out as far as it feels right to go into the future. And it could be a great grandchild, or it could be another being that, because of the choices you made today, you make in your life, they get to live. They get to be here. And they get to have all sorts of choices that we may never have been able to imagine because of your life, because of the choices that you made. Small ripple effects, big ripple effects, big brave things you've done, or little small acts of love. Way into the future, this being gets to be here because of you. And imagining that maybe they turn to you and say thank you. Or maybe they have a different piece of information for you from the future that can share something important about today. So just taking another moment or two to listen, to see if that being has any other support or encouragement, guidance. Drop it into your body if you can. Land it anywhere it feels resonant. And when you're ready, start your journey back through time, through space. Coming back here, back to the present moment, feeling your body, landing back here. When you're ready, maybe taking a look again back into the space where you are, back at that thing that brought you pleasure, or maybe it's something new that is calling to you, and just orienting again back into the now. And when you're ready, just kind of acclimating slowly back to our conversation. And I'm just going to kind of ask, is it Karine or Karen?
Karine.
Karine, thanks. Sorry about that. So Karine, I just want to come back to you and just say, like, how you doing? How was that for you? You seemed like it was pretty moving.
It was incredibly moving. It was one of the most empowering practices I think I've ever done, because I think it really touches on the essence of everything that I'm doing, have been doing to heal and to be here and to offer this and to heal for my babies, you know, as well as myself. This was my object of pleasure. My daughter made this, and I saw her hands when I looked at it, making it and sculpting it. And I think about all those generations beyond me who are going to benefit from what I do today and the choices I make. So thank you, Sage, for letting me get in touch with that very, very viscerally.
Beautiful. I'm so glad. That's so awesome.
Gorgeous.
And if there's, like, I know for me, like, I'm feeling these like reverberations through my body that feel just, I don't even know how to explain them, but they feel important, and they feel full of wisdom, and they feel like a reminder of that who we are and what we do right now matters, and also that we come from this long arc of people who have lived and who have died so that we could be here. And there's just like so much intelligence available and infused into from our ancestors, and that we get to pass on resilience and courage and beauty and love to our descendants. And I think there's an element of, like, when I think about embodied freedom or embodied liberation or just embodiment, how exciting it can be to really feel and understand that we are a part of a long line of survival, of resilience, of freedom in its own right. Even if our lives, we look around and our lives are not free right now for a variety of reasons, the fact that we are breathing and that we are here and we can have access to watch this means that there's a lot of freedom available. Doesn't mean there's not other, oppression, but it's both and, right? And so I want to just, part of this is to draw our attention to our embodied arc of ancestral resilience that also is already going into the future. So, woo! Feeling it up here. Woo!
I mean, what I love,
the ancestors.
Yes, it feels so amazing. And so I'm so curious to hear more from you about how this then, because my felt sense is that it changes the lens through which I even engage with maybe what doesn't feel free. It's easy to look around the world, and I wonder if a lot of people are feeling this way. And I know a lot of people say this to me, that it's so easy to look around the world and just see everything that's going wrong, and it can feel very oppressive. And there is perceived oppression, there's real oppression, there's real threat. And I'm wondering, in your work, how does doing this kind of engagement or embodying this kind of sense of being part of something bigger and this liberation, how does that change the way people then work with these threats that they perceive or that are real in their environment?
Yeah, I love that question. Such a big question and such a question, and it's totally part of what I wanted to talk about today. And again, I just want to say, I don't feel like any expert on this. I'm truly just feel like I am living my life as an experiment. I'm like a trans person, a white trans person walking around in a free and unfree world, privilege, not privilege, oppression. And I am over the moon about how much we are beginning to understand about how our bodies and our nervous system play into how free we feel and how free we don't feel, and our implicit, our wired in reactivity to threats, to oppression, and how we can begin, or how we cannot begin, because we can continue to strengthen our capacity and our toolboxes to be able to work with what is in a way that that generates, again, I just go back to choice, that generates choice, right? Because the opposite, in my opinion, the opposite of trauma, is choice, right? The opposite of trauma is choice for ourselves and choice for our community. And I think that, I'll just talk a little bit about, there's a, in traumatology, this conference is called Embodied Trauma. And right now, at least in my experience, in the world of traumatology and in the world of studying trauma, and which is part of the world that I live in because I'm a practitioner and I like to see kind of what's working, how do we heal, how do we really do this different, right? And there's a current model that sort of says people can't heal if they don't feel safe, right? People's nervous systems, people's bodies, if there's not enough safety, then we can't get back to something called regulation. And regulation means that we have a sense of flexibility and choice. And so there's all these modalities being built right now and sort of imagined and coming through, which are really exciting, which are helping people to be able to increase their capacity to be able to process trauma, to be able to process really shitty things that happened that create, not just shitty, but terrible, terrible things that have created overwhelm in our bodies. And overwhelm just meaning that something extremely stressful happens or terrorizing happens that overwhelms our capacity to cope. And so we get basically thrown into a series of survival management strategies, right? And so we have all these like internal ways that our body implicitly manages threat. And it's like millions and billions of years. This is part of the resilience we have. And it's also part of the, it can be part of the limitation we have too, because it can be both. So the tricky thing about current traumatology, I don't even know if that's a word, but I think you get the gist. The tricky thing about current traumatology is that, again, there's this idea, it's like, oh, we're gonna work with you and to be able to feel enough safety so that you can begin to heal. Okay, so to me, the obvious thing that's sort of problematic about that idea is that most people on the planet right now do not feel safe, right? Like if we look around at the news and we look around at the realities of what's happening, especially to communities that are being extremely marginalized, there's really not a lot of reason, there's not a lot of evidence that could bring people into safety, right? Because of the structural, the structural aspects of oppression that have been in place for a long time. So there's a way that like traumatology is really set up to be able to support people that have had a one-time event that has been traumatizing. And then there's this idea that you go back to safety. It's like you get stuck in the trauma, we build capacity to heal from that trauma, and we build your strength and we build your capacity to be present with it and to be able to metabolize it. And that is freaking brilliant. And there is so much medicine in that, right? And everybody, we all need practitioners and community to be able to, or rituals, right? Which so many indigenous populations have, and that many of the current traumatologists practices have ripped off of some of these, appropriated some of these practices. But we've always kind of known how to be able to start to metabolize some of this overwhelm in our bodies. The tricky part is two things that are a little bit, I don't want to say problematic because I think it's both and, is that one is that when it's not about like an acute event that has overwhelmed you, when it's about a daily, hourly situation that you can't get out of that's overwhelming and threatening, such as poverty, such as being in a marginalized body, Black and brown body on the margins in a variety of different ways, living in a predominantly majority white environment. That's just one example. There's not a lot of relief, right? Like there's not a lot, like there's just, you're always sort of navigating unsafe environments, whether it's at school or whether it's in, airports, or whether it's just constant. And so there's a way that I think the evolution of traumatology is, I'd like to add that we're going to be able to increase our capacity to be able to work with what does it mean to be living in an unsafe world in a body that deems you a threat, right? And that's deep. Right? Because if you are the threat and the world is, much of the dominant world is reacting to you, you're sort of like, where's the safety to be found? You can go into a room with someone and have a small experience of safety with a practitioner, but then you got to go back out, right? Into like the same threatening world. So there's really wonderful and true things that we can do to be able to work through some of the trauma that our body has internalized, no doubt, for sure. But I'd like to kind of add to the mix that I have this sense that people who are in the category of experiencing chronic threat all the time are actually, strangely enough, it has a lot of cost, but there's also a lot of potentially evolutionary benefit that I think that people at the margins are gifting to the whole here. Because our nervous system and traumatology sort of says like, okay, in order to be in your regulation, you have to feel safe. But if I walk out the door, any of you that are extremely marginalized walk out the door and you're never safe, you basically have to figure out how to be safe when you're not safe. Okay, I'm just gonna let you just that land in your mind. Any of you that are walking out the door and feel unsafe for whatever reason, right? Which is many of us, especially at the margins, in marginalized populations, we are literally physiologically asking our body to feel safe when we feel unsafe, right? That's the paradox, right? And so the cost of that is, right? So there's a cost and there's a benefit. Actually, I freaking hate that metaphor. It sounds very economic. So it's just like, I do like the word cost though. We're going to change the word benefit. What the cost of that is you walk out the door, and here's the 4 strategies that we often, our body starts to use. The first one is appease, right? We have to make the other people feel safe so that we can be safe. So marginalized populations learn to code switch, right? If you've heard of that term, it's basically like learning the language of the oppressor or the dominant population to be able to make them feel safe enough so that I feel safe, right? And so we're in kind of like we become these really savvy social beings that know how to determine who's a threat in the room, who's going to sort of target us, or what's going to happen, or what type of personality I need to bring so that I don't, or whoever, the marginalized person doesn't have to like threaten the status quo, right? And I'm not saying that's what you should do, but it's a choice we often want to make because we're just trying to get through our days, right? So appeasement is this like, it's like our nervous system's most latest strategy of the past couple million years. It's like, we didn't used to be able to do this. Like at some point, our mammalian evolution sort of, this is part of what Stephen Porges talks about in the polyvagal theory, is like, before we could learn how to appease with social savvy, we basically just did fight flight. We either were like, I'm gonna dominate you, or I'm gonna get the hell away from you, right? Like those were the 2 other very mobilizing options. But over the past millions of years, like more recently in our evolution, we learned how to have like this connective savvy that we could negotiate threatening situations through facial cues, nonverbal cues, submission dominance, energetics, so much of it, 90% or more nonverbal, where we're just like, I know how to stay safe here, and I'm gonna like navigate through this room. Are folks resonating with that at all out there?
Absolutely, massively. Yes, lots of yeses.
I listened to your talk with Stephen Porges the other day, and I thought it was really interesting, actually, the conversation you had about appeasement, because I was sort of really looking forward to hearing kind of his evolutionary take on it. And I felt like he sort of was like, yeah, it's sort of a thing, but maybe not. And I just I just thought for like marginalized people, like, you know, this is why marginalized people are like some of the most savvy leaders on the planet.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Sage. I think it's such an important thing to mention. And I'm wondering if the word empath here, do you think it's related in some way? There are people who might just be wired, they might be more sensitive than others, but I think many people, depending, they might be marginalized, but they might have had to grow up in an environment where their survival depended on their ability to read the people around them. And so they become hypersensitive to reading people, which also makes them extremely good at reading people. And more nuance, there's more finesse in that for them than maybe for the average person. And I'm wondering if do you think those 2 go together a little?
100%. 100%. When your survival depends on reading a room, you basically develop some freaking superpowers to be able to like know what's going to happen next. And so if you grew up in an abusive environment, a neglectful environment, an unpredictable environment, and or you grew up in a culture or a community that your very being, because of your color of your skin, your gender, your ability, your disability, your you know, your looks, your gender, you know, all of that, your sexual orientation, you just get really savvy, right? And that savviness is evolutionary, right? Because like I just want to say, like, I'm going to say it again, like that's a superpower.
Yes! It's a superpower. An empath with boundaries? Whoa!
Yeah, right. Yeah, an empath with boundaries. And that often takes a while to learn because this is where the cost part comes in again. I'll just use that because I can't think of another word. The challenge of it, I guess I can say, is that if we sort of get the sense of whether from our family system that was not safe or from our society that wasn't safe, we internalize this notion that who we are is literally not okay or a threat. And we start to learn how to do the empath thing, the scanning the environment all the time. What happens is that our body sets that as the norm. And we often get stuck in a hypervigilance. It's sort of like this idea that we can't turn it off. It's not even an idea, it's actually like a reality of like, I have to be vigilant all the time and I have to sort of use these skills all the time. And then what's tricky about that is then connection becomes more about appeasing the other person as it is about an authentic connection, or it is about that your needs ever matter, that your needs ever get tended to, because there's such an orientation to focusing on the other for your sense of safety. So the cost is we often don't learn embodied skills to be able to communicate and experience ourselves in ways to feel that it's okay to take up space, and that we don't always have to be doing the dance of appeasement, right? And it's often hard to shut it off. And it's, especially if we've had to practice it for our entire childhood or whatever. So that's one of the things that we can, is changeable. It just takes practice and it takes awareness. I think it's interesting you mentioned boundaries too, because when a lot of people who grew up in trauma and who are, marginalized, it's like, we know when there's a threat within like a 10-mile radius. We're like, I don't know what it is, but I can feel something behind me. Somebody like 10 cars behind me. I like know somebody's in some sort of road rage and has a gun in their car. Like, how do I know that? I know it because I'm well practiced at feeling, that type of threat. And so, so there's this way that like, how do we, instead of being in the extremes of survival or not, of like intense hypervigilance, or like, I'm just going to shut down because I'm exhausted, which is really reasonable. How do we be able to start to increase our capacity for embodied discernment of when those skills are really necessary and when they're not so necessary anymore? And that in itself is a practice to learn how to do that. And that's part of what we get to do in communities that we feel like are safe enough to learn how to do that. We get to start to practice those.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So again, so appeasement, or the other word to say is fawning, right? That's a survival strategy. That's the first one we'll generally go to because that usually has the least risk. If I can kind of savvy my way through a social environment with my, a lot of people think I'm really nice. Well, I am really nice, but I'm nice for like a lot of it's survival reasons. I'm not so sure how much of the true me is this nice, right? So like, that's honest, and I'm still picking that apart. Like, I am in process about what's what, right? So, but it's a really, somebody just wrote in, I'm the queen at style flexing. Exactly. So we got some resonance here, totally. So we just want to be really thoughtful about like, where are we can we choose some environments in our life where we don't have to do that, where we can power that down and just be ourselves? That's part of the medicine that people who are chronic appeasers really need, right? So the next two strategies are fight and flight, right? When there's threat coming at us, the sort of the older evolutionary strategies are fight and flight. Fight being like, I'm gonna get big and fight back, and or I'm gonna run away. You know, I'm not gonna talk too much about these, but just to say that it would be really, it's really normal, it's kind of a dumb word, but it's really normal for people who are, especially who have marginalized identities, to be stuck in fight or flight. What that means is, you know, when society and culture basically has deemed your identity as less than, and it you know, you get racially profiled, you get bullied, you get all the different things that oppression does, all the different structural and interpersonal things, micro and macroaggressions that come at you every day. A fight response would be a really freaking empowering response to have. The tricky thing is that often when you're in a marginalized identity, the fight response, if we think about all of what we're learning about how bad racial profiling is and police brutality, you may think, I want to have I'm so enraged, I want to have the fight response, but the fight response is going to cause a consequence that's like so much bigger than, you know, potentially threaten, you know, death, or certainly getting very, very hurt. So the fight response is like this very healthy enragement of like, this isn't fair, this isn't okay. No, there's a implicit boundary that the fight response is trying to set up. But what's tricky with structural dominance is that there's punishment for using the fight response almost immediately, right? You're too much, you're too loud, you're too this, you're too that, you know? So, I mean, it's really incredible how much people get chastised for it. So what happens is that healthy aggression, which is a very true healthy reaction, has to get shut down. Like, where does that energy go? Where does that outrage go? Often what happens is two things. One is it gets flipped back and internalized, right? That rage gets internalized towards self. That energy has to get managed in the body. And then it often comes out sideways. It often comes out at people who either someone, you know, in our lives, or, you know, I mean, for me, it comes out in road rage. I'll just acknowledge. I'm working on it, trying to give myself healthy responses, healthy rage responses, but it comes out because if I haven't done a good enough job of like noticing where I haven't like processed my, you know, my daily rage, then it's going to either come in and oppress and depress our bodily systems, and it's going to look for a way out that's just like a release, but usually does more damage, right?
And with people we feel safer with, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it often replicates the very thing that was done to us, right? Unconsciously, right? So that's really tricky. So working with our, you know, part of what we learn in trauma healing is learning how to work with our fight response and giving it some space to be able to be here, especially as marginalized people. It is like really important that we are in communities and we allow in a thoughtful way that's manageable, we allow some of the charge of the outrage, right? Not just emotionally, but physically, right? And what that can look like is like a really good cardio routine that you do that works out some of that charge. It can mean like walks, it can mean like whatever. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It's just basically what it means is something physical that's metabolizing a little bit at a time, some of that intensity that, you know, basically wants to kill somebody or wants to, you know, stop something really bad from happening. That response in us is billions of years old, right? We are here because all of these beings over the past millions of years were able to have a fight response. Like it's implicit in our evolution, and it's sort of like, and it's something that we still have. And we, you know, part of it is to learn how to work with it creatively and constructively, you know.
Can I
And
ask you some, oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go
Just
ahead.
on that, what you just said, because I feel like that's so important for people to hear. Because I think a lot of people resist their own anger because they feel guilty about the anger. They don't feel like it's right. They feel like they're unkind. They might feel like they might judge themselves for having like a nihilistic thoughts or, you know, bloodlust kind of thinking, when this is all part of that response. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that and kind of normalize that for people as something that we don't act out on, but that is just part of our response. Very natural.
Well, first of all, we can act out on it, just if we're in a constructive way that's
Right.
not
Yeah.
replicating harm.
Right.
Like, it's okay to go take a baseball bat in the backyard and, like, you know, get I don't know, obviously whatever your belief system is, I don't want to like hurt the planet if you hit the earth, but like maybe you get a piece of wood and, you know, like maybe you can find something physical that's satisfying. Satisfying is the key here. It's not kind of like a rote idea. It's just like giving yourself permission to have some charge in your body that feels like you can move it out, and there's a little bit of satisfaction. And I think you're absolutely right that there's a lot of negative associations with big anger energy, and that's part of, unfortunately, that's part of how dominance works. Is it's trying to, you know, it's trying to sort of say that's bad, and there's like a lot of pathology around that. It's often, you know, pathologized as like anger disorder, or, you know, I mean, it's part of why women have been pathologized for hundreds, maybe thousands of years of like being angry at the patriarchy and, you know, losing our freaking minds and, you know, sort of having big fight responses, and then those get punished and criminalized and things like that. So there's a lot of evidence that we've internalized that this is wrong, bad, and not allowed, right? And so part of what our work is to be able to start piecing that apart and to be able to let the physiology of what's true for you move in ways that are safe for you, right? Safe being relative, safe and constructive, and that are not replicating harm. You may be thinking about harming someone, and that's actually okay, right? Because it's not actually replicating harm. It's like we want to get to the point of like where there's satisfaction. We're looking to metabolize the charge. It's not so much about hurting someone or hurting yourself. It's like metabolizing the energy, metabolizing the anger so that it can come up and out versus having to like be managing it all the time. And I just want to say, like, I continue to work on that. Like, I know all this, and I'm like, you know, enraged plenty, you know, and managing and containing it in my body because I did that for so many years. So I'm still learning how to work, you know, creatively with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just, wow. Everybody agree? Wow. Some powerful, powerful stuff there, Sage. Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure people have some time to ask you some questions, Sage. Do you have anything else you wanted to wrap up first before we go into some questions?
Yeah, totally. So the last thing I want to say, and this is kind of different, is like, if you study healing from trauma, there's this idea that like there's 4 different states, like appease, fight, flight, and freeze. And freeze is the shutdown, where everything gets super overwhelming and we're just like, forget it, we're out of here. And the system is, it's like the oldest part of our nervous system that shuts down, and just where there's no energy and there's often fatigue, and it's a state of just checking out and disconnecting. And that's really a brilliant state. I want to say that, like, that's a really brilliant state, and our body does that when it needs to. And part of our job is in these communities is to help people just slowly come out of freeze and shut down, because it's a really reasonable place to be, but it's not the easiest place to get out of. And one of the biggest pieces of medicine for that is connection, right? Because we need other regulated nervous systems and bodies and kindness to be able to slowly start to come out of freeze. So I want to say that. But the last thing I want to say is that I actually think there's a 5th state, like there's a 5th survival mechanism that is emerging specifically from people who are healing from trauma and marginalized people. All right, this is like a world premiere of an idea. So there's appease or fawn, there's fight, there's freeze. I'm gonna add a fifth one and I'm gonna call it freed. F-R-E-E-D. Okay, so if we had another couple hours, I'd talk about it. But what you think about, how's that feel in your body?
We're hanging out. We're hanging out.
Right on.
Woohoo! Yeah, go ahead.
So the gist of it is, which is, it's just kind of I've just been meditating so much on what I wanted to say today, and this is part of what came through, is that there's this idea of like we have to get our bodies back to normal and safety. But you know what? That safety isn't serving anyone. It's serving this notion of some people get to be safe and some people don't get to be safe. And what we really need to do is work with these states of activation, because the truth is marginalized people are afraid, but the people who are in dominance are also afraid, right? They're afraid of us, or they're afraid of lack of control. So there's a whole world full of afraid people, and sort of, we just keep going back and forth. And so the freed nervous system state is something marginalized people have to do every day, which is to be able to create enough safety in their body when there is not safety, right? And what it does is it breaks the danger safety binary. It's like, there's this idea, it's like, oh, you're either safe or you're in danger or you're threatened. And what the state of freed does, which marginalized people are the superheroes and the leaders of, is we have to change our relationship to threat. We have to be able to be in relationship with threat, or not even have to, but we are learning to be in relationship with threat and be ourselves anyways, right? And simultaneously be able to learn in our bodies. Like, I really believe that there's neurocircuitry growing right now in each of our bodies where we're moving more toward our embodied authentic selves, embodied authentic truth in a moment where there's a lot of evidence that says that we can't, we shouldn't, and we should be punished for it. And these states that we get to lean into, and it doesn't mean we're not afraid, and it doesn't mean we're not in appease, fight, flight, and freeze. It's not like you're in one or another, but marginalized people are adding this possibility that we can be not free and free at the same time. And I think there's a variety of ways to explore that. I just feel like kind of at the beginning of exploring it. But I'm just like, I'm ready to kind of bust open these boxes of like, we have to get back to safety. It's like, no, I think we have to expand our notion of safety and threat and break that binary in our nervous system.
You're breaking you're breaking a lot of things. This is, and I see a lot of leadership in that freed state. This leadership potential is enormous, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. So that was really powerful. I feel like I'm going to have to work on that for a while. And wherever you end up going to marinate in this more, please invite us to come along. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a while.
Great.
Yeah, I'd love to open it up to some questions for Sage. Mickey, go ahead.
We've got a couple people who've raised their hands, so I'm going to unmute someone. But just before I do that, there is one question in the Facebook group. Someone wanted to know, Sage, what can communities do to create spaces where they collectively help each other with these shifts?
I love that question. Thank you so much, whoever wrote that in. What can communities do to support each other and together with these shifts? I mean, I think there's a lot. First of all, I think we can, if we all look to the communities, the marginalized communities in our communities, there's probably a lot already being done that's just not being seen because it's happening in the margins. So number one is we can look to where, and we can resource the places where some of this work is already being done that maybe we don't even know. So we look to, like if you're in the United States, we look to where the Native folks are doing healing work, or the POC folks are doing healing work, and we resource those healing centers and communities, or the GLBTQ that are providing spaces that are doing collective healing work. Specifically, what we can do is I think we can work, we can do collaborative leadership, right? Because the idea here is to not replicate dominance, right? So we can do collaborative leadership with very, with kind of like sharing circles that involve movement, that involve practices for people to come back and connect with their essential selves, and that also allow there to be expression, both emotional and somatic expression. The thing is like, there's no magic formula. Like the magic formula is to be able to sit in circle and be able to have it feel safe enough for what wants to emerge, what people need to say, what people need to do, where people want to go. And we can really, as a collaborative facilitator, we just have to get really good at helping to sort of like, to support communities to be able to like, just allow that to happen. And I think the second thing I'd say is to be able to offer practices around, like one of the things I did was I learned to teach cardio kickboxing. Not because I actually don't really like cardio kickboxing, but I learned to do it because it was this way that I wanted to teach my community that aggression was okay, right? That sound and movement and punching and whatever, it was like this sort of validated way, and it was contained. And so I think, like, can you get creative about the ways in which you can normalize the reactivity and the suffering that people are going through within the context of oppression? Because so much of the suffering is really related to what people are trying to deal with. So being able to normalize it and have practices where people can metabolize. It's sort of like to be able to metabolize, and then also practices for rest. Because marginalized people, again, I'm sorry I'm generalizing, so I just want to say, as a white person, I'm sorry that I'm generalizing about marginalized people, because that in itself is probably very marginalizing, so I apologize for that. In my experience, having to constantly be in protective mode, there's a way that we get stuck in hypervigilance, and that doesn't allow us to come down and rest. So if you can have some community resting practices, whether it's like a restorative yoga or just like some gentle stretching, or, that can be really helpful too. So like practices that metabolize charge and practices that help people learn how to come toward rest, right? Seemingly easy, but not so easy. But I have more to say about that, so be in touch with me, and I'm happy to follow up with you on that.
Mickey?
Alrighty, so I'm going to unmute Olivia now. So Olivia, you can ask your question.
Hi, Sage. So I'm so enjoying this. Thank you so much. I want to preface my question by saying, bearing in mind what you've just been talking about, that I don't want to exhaust you by asking this question. So I'm really, if it feels like too much, then, you'll take care of that. So I'm a mom of a trans girl, and I would love, if you're willing to share, just to hear anything that comes to mind around my ongoing work supporting her, a lot of which is stuff that you've already talked about. And so, yeah, I mean, I see the appeasing, I see the fawning a lot. I try and provide spaces for pushing and no and boundaries. And I also try and provide space to not have shame when there is appeasing, not to get into that like beat up of, oh my God, I threw myself under the bus and all this kind of stuff. And, so, yeah.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I would say, I bet you everyone would say you're doing a freaking great job, just because like how evolved are you that you're allowing all of that and you're being able to see all that and witness from a place of love, what looks like love, and I got your back, being able to be a caring parent. I would get the book, if you haven't heard of it, Transgendered Warriors by Leslie Feinberg. It's this incredible book that that has a whole bunch of history on how cross-culturally in the world there's always been trans people, So again, for young people to be able to see that they come from this like brilliant, beautiful identity where there's always been trans people here, that has been so helpful to so many of my people in my trans community. I think it's emergent. You know, I think there's going to be places that are going to be safe for your daughter. I think there's going to be places that are unsafe. And I think for you to develop the capacity to be with the reality of that, and to be able to hold your fears and get support around your fears so that your fears don't take you out of your own capacity to be present, because there are going to be difficult things. And so to be able to look at that with reality, you know, and to be able to build your own capacity to be able to, you know, stay with her and to affirm her, to get support that stays with you when you feel wobbly and you feel afraid and you feel sad and rageful, you know, and then to organize your community to be able to create better conditions, and to organize your family to be able to create better conditions for all trans young people and all young people who just want to be who they are. So that's my quick answer to that. And thank you for the beautiful love that you're working on and you're sharing.
That's great. We've got Rosa here, if you have time for one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
We can.
Okay. Hi.
Hi, Rosa.
Thank you for that. That visualization was so powerful. I work with folks that have caused harm. I do somatic healing workshops. And part of that work, we also recognize that everyone causes harm, and people that cause harm are also survivors.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the language that we use to kind of create space, I love your like moving away or problematizing the idea of a safe space, right? And we use the word brave space. Spaces where we can actually recognize the wisdom that discomfort has to offer, right? And so I'm interested in learning more about if you have some ideas around how to deal with like generative conflict in healing spaces. Do you have any kind of somatic practices that you can offer for spaces like this where we're trying to figure out new ways to deal with, you know, discomfort and work through discomfort in a collective democratic space?
Awesome. Thank you. And Brave Spaces, awesome. Thanks for the work you do. It just sounds really amazing and beautiful and evolutionary. Like you're doing it. So thank you for that. Generative conflict. So part of what I would sort of say is to be able to, you know, to create practices that make sense for your community, to be able to learn how to tolerate tolerate somatic reactivity, right? Because generative conflict, there's often a lot of defensive mechanisms and protection that comes up right away, right? Like, I got to get away. I don't agree with you. You're right. You're wrong. And so part of what's underneath that we can be helping each other with is learning how to like literally tolerate reactivity in our bodies, right? So before you get into the content, right, of whatever there's conflict about, just be doing some practices that really, that help people bring up some charge. And it could just be physical. It could be like, okay, everybody just like go in place for a little bit, you know, like run in place a little bit. Notice what you're feeling in your body. Notice what charge feels like, because people have to get acclimated to being able to feel a lot of energy and have some agency with it. Oh, you're muted. I just want to be able to hear you. Sorry. Miggy, could you unmute Rosa?
Miggy? Maybe I can. Hold on.
Thank you.
Unmute now. Okay.
Go ahead,
So,
Rosa.
yes, thank you for that. We spend 8 weeks doing that work, and you know, doing movement work, visualization work, titration, right? And folks are hungry for more, right?
All right.
they've been practicing this stuff, and, you know, I check in with them months after the workshop, and they're doing really great. But there's still conflict, right? And they want to do more than just resourcing and regulating, as you're saying. So yeah, I'm ready to do like a part 2 of this healing workshop, and I'm just trying to like borrow some concepts or some ideas that have been tried and tested.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I have those ideas, but I will say that being able to be with, like, okay, there's still conflict. So what's trying to happen? Like what's innate, like what is trying to happen in the conflict, and being able to take that to like a movement practice, right? Say it's 2 people or it's like 5 people or whatever in a conflict. Maybe you switch the channel and you say, let's just work with the conflict through some movement in the circle, right? And like to get it out of the cognitive and to be able to work energetically and through different types of practices with it. Because, and where do we want to go? Like, where do we want to go with the conflict? Like, what's our ultimate goal? Because if we don't have a shared intention, then there's going to be conflict. So being able to work also with like, is there somewhere we want to be able to meet, and what does that feel like, even if we don't know what it is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, Rosa, where do you work?
I work in Oakland, California, and I work with, I have a partner, a project partner, Amy Paulson of Gratitude Alliance, and we've recently been given a grant to actually train other folks in the city of Oakland, residents and direct service workers, to replicate this workshop with their own communities.
Awesome. What's the organization? Gratitude Alliance?
So my organization is Reclaiming Our Own Transcendence.
Okay,
and I
great.
worked with Balsam and Anton Olivier to create this, I think, groundbreaking curriculum that has saved my life. It's a sacred curriculum, and it's been really powerful and effective with the folks that we've been working with. And all of our participants have been queer people of color. You know, even when we're not creating just a QT pop space, you know, and it's open to everyone, these are the folks that show up, which is really interesting.
Beautiful. This is so exciting. Your work, what you're doing, this is the work that we want to support. So I'm going to have Karine put, if it's okay, put this in the notes somewhere so that we can maybe support some exposure if you would like that.
Yes.
So we can get some support coming your way, because this is so exciting what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to meet you.
Great.
I think we have to probably wrap it up now because we have another session in a little bit. Sage, thank you so very much. I'm sorry to everyone who really wanted to ask Sage a question. I think we could keep you here all day, really. It's a fascinating topic. Sage, how can people connect with you if they want to learn more about the work you're doing?
You can pop on my website, embodiedliberation.com, and you can shoot me an email at sage@embodiedliberation.com. Yeah, my Facebook page, Embodied Liberation. I'm not super active right now, but would be happy to have y'all connect. And
great, thank you so much. Is there a final word you'd like to leave us with before you go?
I feel like I've said so much. I've talked so much. So I'm just like really happy to connect with y'all. And I would mostly just really want to thank you for, you know, for anything and everything that you're doing that enables you to show up in your body and your truth. And that's what's going to support evolution on the planet. And so deep gratitude for your courage and bravery and willingness.
And yours. Thank you so much, Sage. And we'll make sure that everyone has the links where they can find you as well. And I really appreciate the time today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me on, and good luck with the rest of it. What a beautiful summit, y'all. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you out there in the world.
Thank you. Bye, Sage.
Bye.
Oh, wow. So for everybody who's